Welcome to Audrey's broadcast.
Starring Alicia
And Shay.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now on preparation on the imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first primarily hard information of this nature last Tuesday morning at 9 a.m.
And that was President John F. Kennedy earlier this week. The U.S. government has supported Batista, a former soldier and Cuban dictator from 1933 to 1944, who seized power for a second time in 1952 coup. Che Guevara continued to back Batista. Cuban support Castro's revolution, however, grew in the late 1950s, partially due to his charisma and nationalistic rhetoric, and also because of its increasingly rampant corruption, greed, brutality, and inefficiency within the Batista government. On January 1st, 1959, Batista and a number of his supporters fled Cuba from the Dominican Republic. In April 1961, the U.S. launched the Bay of Pigs invasion, an unsuccessful attempt to remove Castro from power.
The Cuban Missile Crisis comes to a close end as Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agrees to remove Russian missiles from Cuba in exchange for a promise from the United States to respect Cuba's territorial sovereignty. This ended nearly 2 weeks of anxiety and tension between the United States and the Soviet Union that came close to provoking a nuclear conflict. The consequences of the crisis were many and varied. Relationships between Cuba and the Soviet Union were shaky for ground. Sometime after Khrushchev's removal of the missiles, as Fidel Castro accused the Russians of backing down from the Americans and deserting the Cuban resolution. European allies of the United States were also angered, not because of the U.S. stance during the crisis, but that Kennedy administration kept them virtually in the dark in negotiations that might have led to an atomic war. Inside the Soviet Union, hardlines were appealed that Khrushchev's withdrawal of the weapons. 2 years later, in 1964, Leonid Brezhnev and Alexander Yeltsin pushed him for power and proceeded to lead the Soviet Union on a massive military buildup. There was perhaps one positive aspect of the crisis. Having gone to the edge of what President Kennedy referred to as the abyss of destruction, cooler heads in both nations initiated steps to begin control over nuclear weapons. Less than a year after the crisis ended, and the United States and the Soviet Union signed an agreement to end above testing in 1968, both nations signed a prohibition treaty.